Hello, existentialists. Welcome to our first post-lockdown, post-quarantine existentialism lecture. If you're wondering where I am, I'm here in my RV. Not even faculty are allowed on campus now, so I was holding off in hopes that I could record the remainder of our lectures in our normal classroom, but that's not an option anymore, so here I am in my RV. I could have recorded these in my house, I suppose, but then you'd have to hear 4 screaming kids in the background, so I think this will be a little better. Even though I'm a bit restricted on space, I bought a whiteboard here, and I should be able to fit all the notes we need on here, so here we are. How fitting a time it is to be studying existentialism. I hope you don't mind if I just start off here with a few minutes of reflection on the nature of the time we're in, and just how, what did we talk about in the very beginning of this course? Well, we started reading our book here, Irrational Man by William Barrett, and I hope you don't mind if I read the paragraph that we started off this class with. Let me do that right now. This is right in the beginning of your book. This is the very first paragraph of chapter 1, the advent of existentialism. Now, I know we went over this weeks ago, and we're in the Kierkegaard unit now, but you'll see just how important this throwback is. The story is told by Kierkegaard of the absent-minded man so abstracted from his own life that he hardly knows he exists until one fine morning he wakes up to find himself dead. It is a story that has special point today, since this civilization of ours has at last got its hands on weapons with which it could easily bring upon itself the fate of Kierkegaard's hero. We could wake up tomorrow morning dead, and without ever having touched the roots of our own existence. So, what's this a reference to? Well, of course, we know that this book was written in the 50s, so this is a reference to the crisis of the dawn of the nuclear age, wondering if nuclear war will just wipe us out one morning. And then we talked in the beginning of this course about how this gave society at large an existential crisis that ripened the field for the explosion of existentialism, which was not new in the middle of the 20th century, but which became popular in the middle of the 20th century, because people were forced to pause and consider those deep questions which, when everything's going well, you can kind of conveniently and comfortably ignore. There is by this time widespread anxiety and even panic over the dangers of the atomic age, but the public soul-searching and stock-taking rarely, if ever, go to the heart of the matter. We do not ask ourselves what the ultimate ideas behind our civilization are that have brought us into this danger. We do not search for the human face behind the bewildering array of instruments that man has forged. In a word, we do not dare to be philosophical. We do not dare to be philosophical. So after we went through the beginning, after we talked about that for a little bit in class, we then had a lengthy discussion where I just opened up the floor and said, so what do you guys think? What existential threats are we facing today? What in society at large is giving us an existential crisis and demanding that we ask questions, that we ponder questions that we've been avoiding for so long. And you all had a bunch of great things to say. This was only a couple months ago now. And we had all sorts of good ideas. You guys had all sorts of good ideas. Certainly the nuclear threat has not gone away. That is still very much real. That's very much an existential crisis. And we came up with a number of other things. But wow, here we are with this virus having smashed all of our assumptions for so long in the modern West, maybe in the whole modern world. We've been operating under so many assumptions that society has got our back, that the basic things we rely on will always be there for us. The stores, shelves will always be stocked. There will always be room for us at a hospital. There will always have the man to fall back on. We'll always be able to rest assured in the prevalence of our creature comforts and the endless expansion of economic growth. We have been promised these things for so long. We've been assured of these things for so long. And those who don't take them for granted are deemed crazy. They're deemed conspiracy theorists or something. And now it's all proven true. Here we are. Can't even get the basics of the store. Can't even trust that you'll have a place in the hospital if you need it. The stock market has been growing hugely in recent years. That's all gone. We've got years and years and years of growth wiped out in the course of days. And this isn't like previous collapses. And I'm no economist, and I'm certainly no historian of the economy or the financial markets, but all it takes is two eyes to look out and see that the crisis we're facing today is completely different. I don't say this to scare you. My outlook is exactly the same it's been this whole course, and I've always shared that with you. It is one of hope, not despair. But this starry-eyed optimism, that's not hope. That's a pathetic substitute for hope. This naivete, this power of positive thinking, that's what existentialism rebels against. Just tell everybody it's going to be okay. Just lie to them. That's what the existentialists say we must never do. We have to be brutally honest about the state of the world, the state, above all, however, of our own souls, of our own lives. Deeming whether they are authentic, whether they proceed from our having actually considered the important questions, and striving, doing our absolute best to live in accordance with the conclusions we come to, come what may, no matter what the cost. Because it's the only option. The only other, quote, option is to be a duplicitous, inauthentic hypocrite. And that's not a genuine option. So here we are, with this crisis foisted upon us, and this is the ideal time to be existential. So it is my sincere hope that the crisis that we're facing today will will invite again another explosion of existential thought into the mainstream, just like the atomic age and the post-World War II era did the same with existentialism then, and kind of made it mainstream. It's become unmainstreamed more recently, so hopefully this will re-mainstream it. Now, that's only half the question. To be existential, that's the first decision you have to make. How to be existential is the second half of the question. And we've talked about a few approaches so far. We've gone through the advent of existentialism throughout history, and it's taking a look at its forerunners, even all the way back to the book of Job. We've looked at Pascal, Kierkegaard. I think they have incredibly insightful approaches. We're also, in the upcoming weeks, going to have to go over people like Nietzsche, Heidegger, Sartre. And they have radically different approaches. It's all existential. But remember, there are diametrically opposed existential approaches. And you guys know that I'm not shy about saying what I recommend. I will be completely fair and balanced in presenting the views of all the existentialists here, but I'm not going to just pretend that I'm unbiased. I'm not. I'm very biased, and I'm proud of it. I strongly encourage you to choose wisely between the existentialists. It's not that you have to side with one completely, but take the insights from all of them, and even the crazy existentialists like Nietzsche have some good points. I strongly encourage you to reject existential nihilism. Remember, existentialism can lead you to this despondent, despairing nihilism where there's no meaning to be found, where you just have to make up a meaning on your own if you want to have one at all and just claim it. Or existentialism can just demand that you be authentic, that you find the meaning out there, that you find it, and that you make it your absolutely your own, that you do not borrow your meaning, that you do not outsource your life's purpose to other people or to society, to the empty promises that society makes about who you need to be. No, it needs to well up from the very innermost depths of your soul, and you need to live in accordance with that. That's what Kierkegaard's saying. That's certainly what Pascal is saying as well. And that's what I encourage you to do. I can't just considering the nature of the crisis we're in today, the whole world, I can't just sit back and pretend that I can be a completely dispassionate, indifferent professor here. This is too important. So I'm going to continue presenting the material fairly, yes, but I'm also going to encourage you to choose wisely between the various existential theories you will hear proposed in the upcoming weeks, because they can make you or break you. You can go mad, like Nietzsche did, or you can become an authentic, flourishing individual. So, with that said, let's continue on with where we left off. Let's pick up with in the middle of the Kierkegaard unit here. So I think this picks up. I've got a couple microphones here. This is just a little mini studio I rigged up in my RV. I hope this is working well. I'm gonna try when I don't need both my hands to talk directly into this mic, because I assume it picks up my speaking a little bit better. I'll try to remember to speak loudly when I can't hold this, when I put it back in its stand, and when I'm writing on the whiteboard or something. But just, you might need to be near your volume control knob so that you can crank it up or down depending upon how things are going. All right. So we left off talking about, we were just about done with the Kierkegaard discussion sheet 2. Keep doing what you were doing during the semester. You know, have your discussion sheets handy. You can still find them on the Google Doc. Just get them and download them, print them off, and just write down the notes, just as you did in class. For discussion sheet 2 here, for Kierkegaard, you already have what comparisons can be made between Kierkegaard and Socrates. Socrates saw his mission as being a gadfly. Kierkegaard likewise saw that someone was needed not to keep making life easier, but to make it better. That was the recognition, remember, that he came to sitting there smoking a cigar in Copenhagen, that all of his peers have been applauded for making life so much easier, whether through new technologies or scientific theories, or even just systematic overviews of knowledge, making it easier than ever before to learn all of these things. Everybody was being applauded for making life easier. Kierkegaard realizes maybe someone's needed to come and make it a little bit harder. Not arbitrarily, to just arbitrarily make life harder makes you a terrorist, but to make it better. And better does not necessarily equal easier. Nothing wrong with trying to make things easier, as long as you're not forgetting that the key here is to live a good life, not an easy one. And that's what Kierkegaard recognized. So he needed to be a gadfly of sorts, just like Socrates saw himself as the gadfly for decadent, morally lax Athens. The gadfly, meaning a horsefly. You see, remember, he's using that comparison because a big, fat, lazy horse actually is benefited by having a really obnoxious fly come and sting it and bite it, because it'll actually get this horse to move when it otherwise wouldn't. So that's what we need in the modern world, Kierkegaard says. And we're still living in the modern era that he was in. Sure, you can say we're in the postmodern West today, and whatever you want to call it. We're living in the post-Enlightenment West. The same post-Enlightenment West that Kierkegaard was living in the 1800s. We talked about the cogito of Descartes, I think, therefore I am. And existentialism turns this completely on its head. This is review. As you guys know, I like to spend a couple minutes reviewing previous discussion sheets when we move on. So I'm just running through this here. I think, therefore I am. Make sure you have that down for the cogito. And how is existentialism an inversion of this maxim? Well, if you look at the cogito, it seems that thought generates existence. In other words, it neglects what? It neglects the primary tenet of existentialism, which is that existence is primary. Existence is the given. Everything else flows from that. You can't get anywhere unless you first take existence for granted, and all that comes with it, including all of the many facets of human life. Not arbitrarily excluding any one of them as unworthy of consideration. You take it all in. The sense experience, the concrete realities of life, the givens, emotion, all of it. That's all what we're starting with. We don't have any right, R-I-G-H-T, to write, W-R-I-T-E, any of that off from the onset. Rationalist philosophy does just that. It deems all that stuff as unworthy of philosophy. But that's absurd. Those are our givens. That's the human condition. We start with it. We start with the human experience, with what it is, what it is to be human, and we go from there. I am, therefore I think. That's what we should say, in other words. Not I think, therefore I am. I am, therefore I think. We invert the cause and effect of Descartes' cogito, and we come to an exposition of existentialism. All right. We were talking then about Kierkegaard's problem with the Danish church of his day. I think this is what we left off with before everything changed. So Kierkegaard, remember, sees that he was severely critical. Remember, he's an extremely devout Christian, but he was severely critical of the Danish church of his day, the establishment church of his day, which I believe was in the Lutheran denomination, although don't quote me on that, I could be wrong. He saw it as Hegelianism in disguise, remember. It was kind of a rationalist philosophical system, and all of the revelation, the person, Jesus Christ, was all kind of secondary to this nice philosophical system that had it all figured out nicely and neatly. And you didn't have to worry about the major demands that might actually arise from following a person. Because it's so much easier to follow an ideology or a system or an ethical theory than it is to follow a person. Because you know exactly what a theory is going to ask of you. Why? Because you made it yourself. It's an invention. A nice ethical system is an invention of man, so it's safe. It's not risky. Following a person is risky. You know, that's why cowards never get married. Because then you're stuck with someone. And that's just one small example of this much deeper thing that Kierkegaard is getting at, which is that Christianity is not about it. Sure, there's nothing wrong with Christian philosophy. He's not saying that it's wrong, philosophizing from a Christian standpoint. You could even call him a Christian philosopher, actually. But what's wrong is to subvert the Christianity itself. That is, Jesus Christ himself. What's wrong, Kierkegaard is saying, is to subvert that to the philosophy. The philosophy is the servant of the person, Jesus Christ, not vice versa. So I gave you this whole, I'm not going to put it on the board again, I gave you a whole kind of dynamic that you could have down in your notes if you like, making more sense of that. How the existential approach sees revelation as supreme. The Hegelian approach sees reason as supreme. So what do we get from reason? We get theories. Theories that might be right, might be wrong. We have the fallibility of feeble human thought. We have arduous incremental syllogisms to try and work it all out. But what do we get with revelation? Well, when we take revelation for granted, that's our existential given. You don't have to wonder about it because it's a given. You never question the givens. You start with them. So the existential approach to Christianity then is what Kierkegaard is advocating for by saying the revelation is a given. That's your starting point. Forget about all your stupid little theories if they contradict the givens, because your theories don't matter when they stand in contrast to the existential givens. So you might be wondering, well, this is all irrelevant to me if I'm not a Christian or if I don't want to be a Christian. Well, no, it's not. Because you can find a way to take this wisdom and apply it to other approaches as well. Because when we are blown away by some new thing, we have an initial excitement about that, hopefully. And we got to hold on to that. Because over time, when the going gets rough, you're going to try to look for ways to weasel your way out of the more demanding aspects of it. Turn it into a nice little theory, a nice philosophy that can be conveniently twisted to your own will. That is what Kierkegaard sees had happened with the Christianity of his day. Certainly the church that he was living in the midst of. Okay, so that's all review here. I think we did not get to the very last question on that second discussion sheet. And let me just give you a couple things to have down for that real quick. What is Kant's most famous distinction? How does Kierkegaard respond to it? This is not an easy question to give any sort of a helpful overview of. But I'm at least going to give it to you for your notes so you have it down, because you should at least know this distinction from Kant of the phenomenon and the noumenon. I'll write this down on the board here. already misspelling things. You guys are used to that. All right. This Kant is famous for being incredibly dense and difficult to understand. I'm going to introduce you very briefly to this distinction by virtue of a quote from Encyclopedia, a philosophical encyclopedia entry. Having seen Kant's transcendental deduction of the categories as pure concepts of the understanding, applicable a priori, meaning before the fact, to every possible experience, we might naturally wish to ask the further question, whether these regulative principles are really true. Are they substances? Does every event have a cause? Do all things interact? Given that we must suppose them in order to have any experience, do they obtain the real world itself? So these are all some conundrums that Kant seeks to answer with this distinction. He didn't answer them directly, but he addresses them by distinguishing between the phenomena and the noumena. According to Kant, it is always vital to distinguish between these realms. Phenomena are the appearances which constitute our experience. The noumena are the presumed, because we don't have direct access to them, things themselves, which constitute reality. All of our synthetic a priori judgments apply only to the phenomenal realm, not the noumenal. It is only at this level, with respect to what we can experience, that we are justified in imposing the structure of our concepts onto the objects of our knowledge. Since the thing in itself would by definition be entirely independent of our experience of it, we are utterly ignorant of the noumenal realm. Okay, so Kant is dividing all reality right down the middle, right? He's dividing everything in half. And this is a little bit different from the famous dualism of Descartes. You could almost say it's more extreme, because Descartes strikes and existentialism rebels against this as well. It's arbitrarily dividing reality in half between matter and spirit, or mind and matter. Kant goes a little more radical here. And I think it's pretty safe to say that existentialism rebels against both Kant and Descartes. And I think that's a good rebellion. Because Descartes' not saying we have no access to the mind. He's saying it's radically disconnected from matter. Traditionally, in philosophy, traditional philosophy, all the way back to Aristotle, all medieval philosophy, agrees there is such a thing as spirit and matter, yes, and that human beings are both spirit and matter, but they're a unity. That spirit and matter are united in one being, one person. So we don't have this arbitrary divide between the two. We don't have traditionally in philosophy, in traditional scholastic, medieval, ancient philosophy, this idea that there's two completely disconnected things, a soul and a body, and the body is just this hunk of garbage that the soul happens to control, like a driver controlling a car. That's a Cartesian innovation, which is common. There's a common dualism in modern philosophy. And then that's taken to the extreme by the materialist, who says, okay, we'll take that divide for granted, but there's actually no such thing as the spiritual realm. It's all just matter. That's even more radical. You will see very few hints of that in medieval and ancient philosophy. But anyway, I don't want to get too deep into that right now. Kant's going even more extreme here, saying we have absolutely no access to the noumenon. Descartes says we do. We have access to everything through his cogito, conveniently. He's figured it all out for us through that. We can derive all sorts of things about both realms, material, mind, and matter, through Descartes' meditation, by starting with the cogito, his clear and distinct ideas, applying deduction to those, and just deriving everything from that, which is obviously crazy. We need the senses. We need to observe. Aristotle realized that very well. But anyway, Kant's going even further and saying not even through the mind do we have access to this. Well, why even posit its existence then? If it's radically disconnected even from anything the mind has access to, why bother even naming it? Why not just ignore it? Well, I would wager we can ignore it, because there is no such distinction between the phenomena and the noumena. Of course there's appearances, we all know that. But philosophy has always understood, you don't need this down in your notes, that there is a seems and there is an is. We don't need Kantian modern philosophy to realize this distinction. There's a seems and there's an is. This is what is immediately obvious to us. It's not always right. It can be deceiving. So what do? We investigate. We philosophize. We try to rise above the seems to the is. Now, subjectivism says there is no is. Everything is just seems. Relativism would be related to that. But the common sense notion and the traditional philosophical notion is that both of these exist, but we have a duty to zealously investigate, to make sure that we're not stuck in the seams, because there is, and contrary to Kant, we do have access to it. We can discover the is. Even though we're wrong a lot, it doesn't mean we can't discover it. That doesn't mean it's radically inaccessible to us. Forgive me if I'm sweating a bit here. It gets hot in this RV, even here in April. Okay. So what's Kierkegaard say? Kierkegaard says that the noumena cannot be grasped as a concept, not because it isn't real and there are only appearances. Kierkegaard is not saying everything. Kant's basically saying everything we deal with, whether with the senses or even with philosophy, is just appearances, just phenomena. But Kierkegaard is saying the noumena, we are dealing with it, but it's greater than thought itself. Thought itself is within the noumena. And we are operating from that given with our very thought itself. And no matter how much we expand our thought, it's never going to become greater than what? The existential givens of the noumena. So he's not so much categorically rejecting Kant as he is offering an important clarification. And it's very much a rebellion against the rationalism we can see here, that we see in the early moderns. Okay. That's crazily abstract, I know. Don't worry about being tested on understanding that. Have this down in your notes for that question. You'll be fine. I just want you to be exposed to that distinction for now, because I want to move on to our third discussion sheet. Okay, Kierkegaard discussion sheet 3. We have, in this discussion sheet, primarily Kierkegaard's famous trifold way of life. That there are 3 basic ways you can approach life, and only one is the really worthy way, as you might have suspected. We'll get to that shortly. Let me erase what we have here right now. But as always, before we get to that, I want to share whatever words of wisdom we have in the textbook before I give you that for your notes. A couple more things on Kant, actually, from your book I want to run through. Ultimately, our textbook author says, what I want to know about the thing is what characterizes it in the way of definite observable qualities. He's talking more about Kant here, our author, in this paragraph. I'm on page 161, going into 162. Kant says this, that what we want is, I'm going back and forth here, to know about the thing is what we want to know, what characterizes it in the way of definite observable qualities. And existence, far from being an observable quality, is in fact too general, remote, and tenuous a property to be represented at all to the mind. So existence, which happens to be what existentialism is all about, is too tenuous and remote an idea. We don't even really care about it. What we care about is that this is a really big, fat, washable marker. That's, we care about these more superficial qualities that we can observe. That's what Kant's saying. Hence, all modern positivism takes its cue from Kant's doctrine and discards all thinking about existence, metaphysics, as it's referred to. Rejects this as pointless, because existence cannot be represented in a concept, and hence thinking about it will never lead to any definite results in observation. The crossroad in modern philosophy is precisely here, and Kierkegaard takes a road leading in the opposite direction from that taken by positivism. If existence cannot be represented in a concept, he says, it is not because it is too general, remote, and tenuous a thing to be conceived of, but rather because it is too dense, concrete, and rich. I am. And this fact that I exist is so compelling and enveloping a reality that cannot be reproduced thinly in any of my mental concepts, though it is clearly the life and death without which all my concepts would be void. All right. So what's Kant saying? Sorry, I was hoping to move on, but here I am diving right back into it. Well, here, let me say what Kierkegaard's saying. Here's our thought, and here's existence, or the noumena. The thought is all within that. We're already starting from it. We can't go saying that we need not bother with metaphysics. We can't go saying we need not bother with existence because it's too abstract, too remote. No. It is the very thing we begin with. It is the very thing we are embedded in no matter what we're doing. We are operating within it no matter what. Reality is real and we're in it. And that's our given. No matter how much we expand our thought, what's always going to be greater than it? Existence. So we can never philosophize our way out of existence. We're always operating within this given. We're always operating within the existential givens. Any attempt to philosophize, to rationalize your way out of the existential givens, just like a dog chasing its tail. You can't. You're just going to be going around and around. You're always going to be stuck within the very things that you were trying to rationalize your way out of, because there's nothing else you can do. I mean, I could keep on multiplying analogies here, I suppose. Like trying to lift yourself up by your own bootstraps. It's not going to happen. You're never going to fly that way. So, if it's difficult sometimes to philosophize about existence, that's only because we're already within it. That's only because it's already everything. It's never to be written off as something that philosophy is not to be concerned with, however. That would be the very definition of absurdity. Okay. Kant can justly be called the father of modern philosophy, along with Descartes, because out of him stem nearly all of the still current contending schools, positivism, pragmatism, and indeed now existentialism. The difference between positivism and existentialism can be seen simply as different responses to Kant's point that existence is not a concept. So sure, it's not a concept. It is that within which all concepts reside. It is greater. It's not more remote or tenuous. I exist. And this is not at all a matter of speculation to me. I do not find this existence reflected in the mirror of the mind. I encounter it in my life. You don't need to sit down there and philosophize to realize that you exist. That's your gift. You do exist. That is explosive to be able to say I exist. And where then, our author continues, do we really come to grips with it? For Kierkegaard, this decisive encounter with the self lies in the either-or of choice. So where do we really confront our existence? In the will, in the choice, our free choice. So when we want to have everything nicely and neatly figured out for us, and there's nothing wrong with figuring out clear answers to questions that arise, we should do that. But when we want every single thing we face to be fully figured out by reason, and to have a clear and distinct and conclusive and certain answer to every single little thing we do, what are we doing then? What are we doing to ourselves? What are we doing to our existence if that's what we insist upon? We're rendering it a much smaller thing than it's meant to be. Because we are most confronting existence in the freedom of choice, in the existential choices we make. And I think I used this example already in class, but if you're sitting there in math class and your teacher has carefully gone through all of the proofs of the Pythagorean theorem, and you were for some reason awake, and you followed each step carefully in this proof, and then you get to the conclusion, you decide to submit to that conclusion, and that's awesome. Congratulations, I'm glad you did that. I'm glad you decided to submit to that conclusion that the Pythagorean theorem is indeed valid. That's good for you. That doesn't say much about you, though. I'm not that impressed. Why would I be? You just had it absolutely proven to you. There was no boldness in your existential choice to submit to the Pythagorean theorem. Every little bit of it was mapped out to you by a rationalist approach, which is good in geometry. But life is more than geometry, as much as Descartes would have you think otherwise. The most meaningful parts of life, when we're confronted with something existential that we can't figure out, and we make the leap anyway. Kierkegaard's saying ultimately what matters is the leap of faith. That only then do we really become fully alive, become fully authentic, existentially authentic human beings in the leap of faith. Diving in, not even knowing exactly what you're diving into, but choosing to nevertheless. And this gets to our three ways of, three types of life. But before we get to that section, let's see, the last quote here from our textbook, page 163. And so any man who chooses or is forced to choose decisively for a lifetime, and therefore for eternity, since only one life is given to us, experiences his own existence as something beyond the mirror of thought. He encounters the self that he is, not in the detachment of thought, but in the involvement and the pathos of choice. Thought can be completely detached. The world's biggest jerk, the world's biggest hypocrite, the world's biggest coward, if he can completely agree with all of the conclusions, all of the correct conclusions in math and science and all the other pursuits that can be fully figured out by reasonable processes. And that doesn't make him any better. He's still the world's biggest jerk and hypocrite. But when you have to choose decisively on something that really matters, a choice that wells up from the very deepest depths of your soul, your free will, which is your free will, it's those choices that define you. And these choices are often definitive lifetime choices, because in these choices you decide who you are. And it doesn't mean that you're done after you've made one of those choices, because it has to be renewed every single day. And you have to choose every single day to live authentically in accordance with that fundamental existential leap of faith you made maybe many years earlier. And remember, for Kierkegaard, this is all about Christianity. So what becomes of the Christian who maybe had that moment years ago, but since has just settled into a nice routine of, he doesn't commit the great sins anymore because he's not particularly tempted to anyway. He keeps going to church, stuff like that. But that's about it as far as his Christianity is concerned. Well, that's not a Christian at all, Kierkegaard would say. He's no longer really living authentically with that leap of faith he made so many years before, perhaps. That needs to be renewed each day. We need to remember each day who we are and recommit ourselves to who we are. And, there's no escaping the fact that this is all about Christianity for Kierkegaard, and he doesn't see much meaning outside of it. But I think you still can take these lessons and apply it to other realms, as I've said before. And the lesson would be this: don't drift. Decide who you want to be intentionally, as a free act of the will. Decide who you want to be, and live every single day of the rest of your life as a consequence of that decision. Don't drift. Don't just live each day going with the flow, doing what you have to do to get through the day, paying the bills, going to school, trying to not get into fights. You drift for very long, you're going to wake up one day and realize you don't know who you are anymore. Because we're not made to drift. We're made to live intentionally, deliberately, authentically, existentially. All right, so the three types of life according to Kierkegaard. Aesthetic, ethical, and religious. This is going to be a little tricky for me to squeeze under the board. I'm going to do my best here. It's not exactly as big as the board we had on campus. Aesthetic, ethical. This table is already in your discussion sheet. What is going on with these three ways of life? To make his position clear, Kierkegaard elaborated 3 levels of existence: the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious. So what does he mean by these 3? Well, we'll start with the lowest, the aesthetic life. What is the aesthetic life? Well, this is someone who lives solely for the pleasure of the moment. This is one who lives solely for the pleasure of the moment. What philosophy does that remind you of? Well, hedonism, Epicureanism. This is, but we can't quickly leave this category because you don't understand, Kierkegaard is saying, he's saying you don't understand how many people fall into this category who think they don't. This obviously includes the Epicurean. And if you've heard of that before, it might be associated in your mind with downright hedonism, but it's not. If you just look up a definition in the definitionary, in the dictionary of Epicureanism, I don't know what it would say. It might say something like a hedonistic way of life, and that's what it's often considered as. But the Epicurus himself is not at all advocating for outright hedonism. He's saying no, you have to be very careful and plotting out your pleasures and actually moderate them so that you can have the most pleasure overall in your life. It's this very strategic hedonism. You can be a very well-to-do person and be an Epicurean, and it's a pathetic way to live. Because although you're not some drug-addicted bum in the street who just has no filter, he has no brake pedal, going after his pleasures. This is no better. This is actually worse, probably. Because at least a downright hedonist is going to crash and burn at some point. He's going to realize that he hasn't been living a good life. An Epicurean might not. An Epicurean is living just as pathetic a life, but he might never realize it. Because he's been strategic enough in how pathetic his life is that he'll never have a wake-up call. I mean, he will have one, but he might go much longer without having one. So this is the Epicurean way of life. It's just dedicated to just... if you're only living for the pleasure of the moment, you're a downright hedonist. If you're living for the pleasure, the long-term view of pleasure, you're an Epicurean. Just as pathetic, just as much the aesthetic way of life. But here's the real clincher. It's not just the Epicurean who lives this type of life. Let's see who else Kierkegaard says is included in this category. A child. This is how a child lives, and that's fine for a child because it's just you can't expect more than that from a child. That's not blameworthy for a child to live this way. They glow in the moment, responding to some simple and beautiful object with all the grace of their nature and their blood. They are also thrown as quickly and immediately into despair if the flower that delights them fades. So the aesthetic person, they might really enjoy things when those things they enjoy are available. And then as soon as they're not available, they're thrown into a fit of despair. Those are sometimes, hopefully, those existential wake-up calls that remind us how pathetically we've been living. What's that great quote from Pascal? Maybe you remember. A trifle consoles us because a trifle upsets us. And that's not good. It's not good to be upset by a trifle. We should be bigger than that. As my grandfather would say, you are as big as the littlest thing that bothers you. And that's certainly the case with one living the aesthetic life. Whatever... And we all like to think of ourselves much more highly than we should, probably. And but one way to have a fairly objective test of where you are, where you're actually standing with your life, the state of your soul, if you will, is to look at what does upset you. If you are thrown into these fits of despair or even just moodiness and sadness and depression because of some relatively minor thing being removed from your life, that means you weren't living a very authentic life before that, because If if that's how unstable you are, then you haven't built your life on something sufficiently stable. You have to build your life on things that don't come and go so easily and quickly. So that's in the end, this collapses into despair. Our textbook says here. Ancient Epicureanism shows this. It is haunted by the images of despair that it has sought to banish from its thinking. This is interesting. Our textbook author. He's bringing up ancient Epicureanism, but he's saying that even that is haunted by images of despair because they know that the pleasure, the pleasant life that they're after, it's not trustworthy. It's not stable. It's not actually a legitimate way of ordering your life. After trying to have it be pleasant. The most beautiful Epicurean poems of the Greeks and the Romans are always haunted by sadness. There is a grinning skull behind the flowers. A grinning skull behind the flowers. It's like the power of positive thinking. Here's a bunch of flowers here, but then if you look closely, you see there's a corpse behind it. Because it's doomed to failure. A human being is made to live for much more than that. And he also points out here that life yields so many weeds along with its flowers that the man who has staked his whole life on its pleasurable moments will become desperate in his search for them. And the extreme example of this would, of course, be a drug addict. All a drug addict is thinking about is where he's going to get his next hit. And we all know, basically everybody knows that's a pathetic way to live, but how many of us do live that way? Not with drugs, but with whatever other stupid little thing we're fixated upon. Getting the next text message from the person we're hoping to hear from, getting another like on some Facebook post, maybe some grade. Please try to get a good grade, but don't let that be the object of your life either. At the end of the day, no one really cares if you're on the honor roll or not. These fleeting little rewards that we get so fixated upon, those are not reliable, and it's no way to live. But that's exactly what the aesthetic person is after. Now here, as I had mentioned before, is the real twist. Here's Kierkegaard's real twist on the aesthetic. Because so far he hasn't said anything too radical. Kierkegaard's treatment of the aesthetic is given a new and radical twist when he extends the attitude to include that of the intellectual aesthete, the contemplative who tries to stand outside of life and behold it as a spectacle. Interesting would be the dominant category under which the aesthete views all experience. So he's basically saying this to all the philosophers of his day. He's saying, you guys are all living the aesthetic life. You're just like a child. You're just like an Epicurean. You're just like any hedonist who lives solely for the pleasure of the moment. It just so happens that you're after intellectual pleasures. That doesn't make it that much better. We're soul and body. So someone who we would more easily observe as a hedonist is living for the pleasures of the body. You're living for these intellectual rewards. That doesn't make you any better. Kierkegaard says you're still just in the first stage of life, the most pathetic stage of life. Fine for a child, not for an adult. So what we want to have down there in that first column is that this includes the intellectual aesthete. Aesthete just being one living the aesthetic life, not athlete. So the intellectual aesthete, he might be a philosopher in a comfortable department position at a big university, and he analyzes all sorts of ideas while sipping his Starbucks latte, and he finds them rather interesting or boring. And if they're boring, he shuffles them aside. But some of them are very interesting, and he even talks with a voice that just shows people how interesting he finds things sometimes, and they don't affect him at all. He goes about his life the same way, the same self-centered way, no matter what ideas he happens to be considering, because he's detached from them. He's observing them. He's a spectator. He's just He's just watching things happen and commenting on them. That's what Kierkegaard saw the philosophers of his day had become, commentators. They weren't authentically involved in anything. They weren't existentially involved. They weren't committed. They weren't real human beings. They weren't being what a human being is meant to be. They are observing and commentating and finding things interesting. And that's also a pathetic, aesthetic way to live. I'm reminded of a great Teddy Roosevelt quote. I've got it somewhere in my notes, but I don't want to go try and shuffle through and find it now. It's you can look it up. It's the Man in the Arena quote. The Man in the Arena, Teddy Roosevelt. Great quote. It begins with some, and I'll just paraphrase because I don't have it memorized, but it's something to the effect of, it is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out where the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dirt, sweat, and blood, who strives valiantly, who fails again and again, but who at least in the end, even if he continues to fail, at least his place is not along with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. That's a paraphrasing of a quote, but it's something like that. Teddy Roosevelt's pointing out, we got all sorts of critics today. Everything that people do who are actually in the fight, they've got something to say about, but they never get in the fight themselves. They never take any risks, so they'll never fail. But that if you never risk failing, as T.S. Eliot said, only those who risk going too far can possibly know how far they can go. So these aesthetes, these intellectual aesthetes, they might seem real special because they never fail, but that doesn't mean it's not because they're special. It's because they're lame. It's because they've never tried anything that they could fail at. All they do is observe. All they do is act as intellectual spectators. That is not what philosophy is. That is not what it must be. Remember, Kierkegaard is like BFFs with Socrates, the gadfly, who the father of philosophy, who showed us that philosophy is a way of life, the love of wisdom, not the knowledge of wisdom, the love of wisdom. And love implies a way of life. It implies doing things. It implies, no matter the cost, behaving in accordance with the conclusions you come to in your philosophizing. And of course, Socrates showed us that. Why? Because he died. He could have easily not died because of his principles, but he chose to. And many of the greatest philosophers have done the same thing. They were put to death because of their principles, but they never wavered. Think about Boethius. Check out The Consolation of Philosophy if you ever want a great traditional classical philosophical text. St. Thomas More, philosopher who also was put to death because of his conviction and his principles. So that would never happen to an intellectual aesthete. Why? Because he'll always find a way to be flexible if he has to be. As soon as, he'll find a way to twist his philosophy to line up with whatever's popular in the day. He'll never call out society for its evil ways. He'll never, unless it's politically correct to do so, then he'll do all sorts of calling out. But he'll make sure first that he knows it's politically correct to do so, and it's popular to do so, and then he'll call things out. But he'll never do so if it's unpopular. He'll never call out an injustice that's unpopular to call out, because he's aesthetic. He observes, he critiques, he finds things interesting. He's never actually involved. Okay, enough of that. Let's move on to the next type of existence according to Kierkegaard. It is by an act of courage that we begin to exist ethically. We bind ourselves to ourselves for a lifetime. So we graduate from the aesthetic to the ethical life. This is a major this is a really good. Now, it's not the best, which is what Kierkegaard calls the religious life, and I haven't lined up my columns very well here, have I? But how do we graduate? Because we all begin as aesthetes. How do we graduate from that level to the next? By an act of courage. So we have an act of courage. And then we enter the ethical domain. And this is a noble domain. It doesn't get enough credit, I think, for Kierkegaard. And when one has entered the ethical phase, he's looking for a system that gives answers to how we should behave. And he's trying to obey those answers. And that's his pattern for life. That's his map. He's got a roadmap and he's trying to follow the map. And that's good. That's much better than the aesthetic life, who's just kind of not even involved, not even committed to any regimen. We'll talk about why it's not enough, but it's good. It's a good growth beyond the first level. In modern times, philosophers have shifted. I'm reading from the book now on page 165. In modern times, philosophers have shifted their inquiry to an analysis of the language of ethics. Such linguistic analysis does not in the least require that the man who makes it himself exist ethically. It is thus perfectly possible, and in fact often happens, that a philosopher has worked out a complete theory of values in the abstract, may yet remain in the childish existence, and has never felt the bite of the ethical upon it. One's values may thus be all down on paper, but one's actual life goes on as if the ethical does not exist. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself in introducing this, because he's still talking about how one can suppose that he is in the ethical by having this ethical system written down, but you're only actually making the graduation from the aesthetic to the ethical if you exhibit an act of courage and live by those doctrines, if you actually live in accordance with the conclusions that your ethical system comes to. And that's noble, that's commendable when you actually make that change. That should be required, in fact, for philosophers, to make sure that they've had that graduation, because most haven't. I agree with Kierkegaard. Most philosophers today are right in the aesthetic column. Just like soldiers have physical fitness tests, philosophers should have moral fitness tests. You shouldn't be taken seriously as a philosopher if you're not going to act in accordance with the ethical conclusions, at least, that you come to in your philosophizing. But anyway, let me give you something to have down for this middle column before we talk more about it. The ethical approach to existence, the ethical existence, looks to coherent or consistent systems to give clear answers on how to live. This is better than aesthetic, but it is not yet truly existentially authentic. Okay. Why not? Why is the ethical way of life not definitive for the human person? Why do we need more still than just ethics, than just an ethical existence? Well, let me continue on with the book here. Why burden ourselves with conscience and responsibility when we are going to die? And that will be the end of it. Kierkegaard would have approved of the feeling behind Nietzsche's saying, God is dead, everything is permitted. And he's not agreeing with that saying. He's saying the sentiment behind it, that hypothetical syllogism is valid. And Kierkegaard himself was fascinated by the bold, amoral figure of the seducer or Don Juan, who, though secretly in despair, is at least living passionately. Kierkegaard never wearies of telling us that what is at stake in Christianity is our own eternal happiness, not the maintenance of a morality that may be socially desirable or at least socially approved. What does the ethical give you? The ethical gives you systems that make sense. Systems built like geometry almost on a certain number of postulates that hopefully don't have contradictions within them. And they're like maps that they give you ways to figure out how to logically resolve dilemmas when you find yourself in them. Very handy resource. And this is good. It is good to have ethical systems because we don't want to constantly have to rehash the same dilemmas over and over again. But when push comes to shove, human life needs something deeper still to give it really authentic meaning, really existentially authentic meaning. It needs something, well, Kierkegaard would say religious. It needs something that doesn't just give you the what to do, but the why you are doing it. So an ethical system says, do this, don't do that. And someone living the ethical life does this and doesn't do that. But after he successfully does this or doesn't do that, he's still asking himself, why am I doing this? Or not doing that? Why? Nietzsche says, if God is dead, all is permitted. Kierkegaard would probably agree. Not that God is dead, but that if he were dead, if there was no God, everything would be permitted. Because an ethical system could still exist on paper. It could still give us the what to do and the what to not do. But it would fail to give us the why to do that. And the why to not do that. Because if everything is just a bunch of matter, then who really cares how you treat it? Who really cares what you do with it? I have absolutely no moral duties with respect to my computer. Because it's just a hunk of matter. If I want to destroy it, I can. But I do have moral duties to other people. Because they're more than just hunks of matter. So we can't get the deeper why that we crave, rightfully so, that we need from the ethical. It's also much easier to twist kind of subtly. This is another point that I shouldn't get too deep into now, I suppose. But it's much easier to twist the ethical, especially if you're a cunning philosopher. You can kind of come up with all sorts of ways to justify what you want to do, even if you shouldn't be doing it. But this requires pause here, because Kant, for example, he gives this really strong ethical argument, and I like a lot of his arguments in his philosophy of ethics. I do. It's categorical imperative. It's very good. But I had a philosophy professor as an undergraduate, and he said, he was an atheist, and he said, well, why can't we just have the Christian ethics without all the, Jesus, death, and resurrection stuff in church and heaven and hell, and why can't we just have the teachings? What do you think Kierkegaard would say about that? He just scratches his head. It's like, that doesn't make any sense, Kierkegaard said. It's like, it would be like having a hunk of iron and a hunk of gold right there and saying, why not just the iron? I mean, sure, you can do a lot with iron. It's great. You can do a lot. I mean, you can sell a hunk of iron for a certain amount of money, but consider how much more value is in the gold. You're missing the whole point. It's like you're advocating for the means to the exclusion of the end, Kierkegaard would say. Yes, let's have the morality, but above all, let's have the purpose of the morality. Let's have the very source and summit of the morality. Let's have what it flows from and what it flows towards. You're kind of missing the whole point of the ethical if you don't have both the motivation of the ethical and the end towards which it is directed. So, what's central here? Kierkegaard is fixated upon, and this came up in a previous discussion for a bit in an earlier class. Kierkegaard is kind of fixated upon this biblical scene of the sacrifice of Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac. Let me read a quote from the book here. Abraham and Kierkegaard were both in exceptional situations. Most of us are not called upon to make such drastic sacrifices. Remember Kierkegaard's existential choice of giving up the woman he loved for breaking off the engagement. Most of us are not called upon to make such drastic sacrifices, but even the most ordinary people are required from time to time to make decisions crucial for their own lives. And in such crises, they know something of the suspension of the ethical, of which Kierkegaard writes. For the choice in such human situations is almost never between good and evil, where both are plainly marked as such, and the choice, therefore, is basically made already, in the certitude of reason. Rather, it is between rival goods. So here's one problem with the ethical life. Don't be unethical. That's not the point here. The point here isn't to be unethical. The point here is to have an even deeper wellspring still, to give our existence authentic meaning. And why do we need that? Well, because what ethical systems primarily do is they tell us to do good and avoid evil. They tell us what individual acts are good and what individual acts are evil. And that's great when you're in a situation that has one path that's evil and one path that's good. Then an ethical system can come to your rescue and say, avoid the evil path, do the good path. What if you've got two paths in front of you and both are good, but you can't take them both? How does an ethical system figure that out for you? Well, it really can't. When you're in that, and that's the most important decisions we have to make in life, are between rival goods, not between a good and an evil. Our textbook makes a remark. We are in where that it says we're in sometimes in situations where we are bound to do some evil either way. I do disagree with that. I don't believe there's such a thing as necessary evil. I believe that evil is the one thing that is never necessary. But leaving that aside, the point remains that we often have to choose between goods. The only way to meaningfully choose between goods is to what? Is to know who you are. And is to know which good aligns with that existential choice of who you want to be. Just going back to what I said earlier, you got to choose who you want to be and live every day of your life authentically in accordance with that decision. Every single day. So, the ethical can't resolve that for us. And again, Kierkegaard, back to Abraham here. You know the biblical story, I'm sure, where God asks Abraham, says, sacrifice your son, Isaac. The son, God even reminds Abraham, and I don't have the quote in front of me now, but if I recall Genesis correctly, God says, sacrifice your son, Isaac, whom you love. So he's reminding Abraham how much he loves his own son, Isaac. Saying, sacrifice him. It's the most difficult thing God ever asked of anyone in the whole Old Testament. And this was a test, of course. As you probably know, I'm sure most of you know the story already. Abraham passed the test. He didn't sacrifice his son. God didn't actually want human sacrifice. He didn't actually want Isaac to be killed. But Abraham couldn't have confronted that situation with an ethical system, could he have? Abraham could only confront that situation with an existential choice. And Abraham had already made his existential choice. God or nothing. God above all. Period. End of discussion. God above all. God before all. God above all. And Kierkegaard is going to say that's actually the only really authentically meaningful way to live. And I'm not saying you can't find wisdom in this, even if you're not going to go in that direction. But that's certainly how Kierkegaard's putting it here. We need to have one absolutely supreme principle for which we live. One absolutely supreme principle that directs everything else. Because ethics is not one and supreme. It is not one. It is many. There are many ethical criteria. If we have many things that are the ultimate sources of meaning in our lives, if we have many diverse individual sources of our existential authenticity, then what are we? We're of many hearts. But Kierkegaard says the purity of heart is this, willing one thing. And he's right. We're going to be torn in many different directions if we have multiple things in our lives vying for supremacy. We need to have one absolutely supreme one. And reason is not going to nicely and neatly and clearly tell you what that one thing is. Like, it will tell you the Pythagorean theorem is valid. Instead, you're going to need to make an existential choice, what Kierkegaard calls the leap of faith. And that is how you graduate to the next level. The leap of faith. You make the leap of faith. You choose one absolutely supreme principle. And for Kierkegaard, he's going to say it actually that has to not just be a principle, but a person, the person Jesus Christ. You make the leap of faith, and you fix that one principle as the absolute end, the absolute source, the absolute meaning of your life. And every single solitary thing, no matter what, in your life is directed by that. Can't be your spouse, can't be your kids, can't be your friend, can't be a given ethical system, can't be your job, can't be some project you're working on. All of those things are completely unworthy of being the one absolutely supreme principle of your life. So Kierkegaard is going to say it has to be God. And that when you do that, you're in the religious form of life. The religious level of existence, one who's in the religious level of existence, I should say, deeply commits himself to one single thing. And he makes an existential choice that binds him. And that existential choice is probably going to require giving something up that's not wrong. All you have to do to live the ethical life is to give up things that are wrong. And there's not all that much merit in that, is there? Things that are wrong are also damaging to us. And if you're wise, you realize that you shouldn't want to do them anyway. But that's not enough to really exist. To really exist, you got to make the leap of faith, Kierkegaard is going to say. At some point, you're going to come to a crossroads in your life where you have to decide between things that are good, and you're going to have to give up one of them. And what is it going to be that guides that decision? It's going to have to be that one single thing that overrides all other things. You got to choose what that thing is wisely. Because if we don't have it, if we just have a bunch of different individual tenets in an ethical system leading us, they're going to be in conflict all the time. We're going to be pulled in this direction and that direction, and we're not going to be of one heart. But you can only live peacefully, not to mention authentically, if you have one heart. You got to be of one heart in accordance with that one thing that we've chosen as the absolutely supreme principle of our lives. All right. For Abraham, that was God. And that's why Kierkegaard is obsessed with Abraham. It wasn't even his own son. And if you know the biblical story, you know that this son Isaac was given to Abraham. It was a miracle, his birth. His wife was way too old to have kids. And Abraham had prayed and prayed and prayed for years and years and years for a son. Finally, God gave him one. The greatest blessing of his life. And then one day comes and God asks him to sacrifice him. Utterly, it would not be impious to say it is a cruel test even. And yet Abraham passed it because he had made that leap of faith. He had already settled in his mind. No exceptions, God first and God only, and God always. Kierkegaard is begging everyone to make that same choice. Now here's the thing. You make that choice and you proceed. This might sound strange, but Kierkegaard's insisting upon it. This is actually the name of one of his books. This is not comfortable. It proceeds with fear and trembling, he says. He's actually taking that from a quote from the New Testament. Can't remember chapter and verse, but it's work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Because it's not comfortable. There's a lot of comfort in mathematics. It's all nicely and neatly figured out for you. There's not the same degree of comfort in this. You don't have this certitude of mathematical reason guiding your every step. That doesn't mean it's to be avoided because of its risk. The best things in life are risky. The most meaningful things in life are always risky. Certainly, the approach we take to life itself, if it's going to be the most meaningful, is going to be a risky one. It's not going to be one guided by mathematical certitude every step of the way. The terror of confronting oneself in such a situation is so great that most people panic and try to take cover under some universal rule that will apply, if only it will save them from the task of choosing themselves. This is scary, because we've all kind of done this at some point. We do endless Google searches. What should I do in this situation? What do the studies say I should do? And then we just waste our lives trying to figure out what we should do and never actually doing what we already know we should do. Because we don't want to make the choice ourselves. We don't want to dare be existential. So we're always trying to outsource our existentialism, trying to force reason to figure it all out for us, which it can never do. I'm a philosopher, I love reason, but it can't figure it all out for us. If only it will save them from the task of choosing themselves. Unfortunately, in a good many cases, there is no such universal rule or recipe available. Spend your whole life Googling for studies that have figured it out for you. You won't succeed. The studies haven't figured it out for you. There is no universal rule or recipe available. The individual can do nothing but muddle through on his own and decide for himself. Life seems to have intended it this way, for no moral blueprint has ever been drawn up that covers all the situations for us beforehand, so that we can be absolutely certain under which rule the situation comes. Now, I'm a big fan of moral philosophy and ethics. I am, and I'm not arguing against it. Please take it seriously. Please do your best to live in accordance with it. The point is simply, and I'll stop repeating myself soon, but I have to a few times because I don't want to lead you to an unhealthy extreme here that just neglects the moral systems and the ethics. Those are very important. The only thing that we have to remember is that they can't figure everything out for us. What we need is something deeper still, to give our life really deep, existential, authentic meaning and purpose. Simply being convinced that you'll always do the right thing in accordance with some ethical system is not going to give you that. Okay. Why, in any case, should the discovery of the religious come to us at the moment in which we feel most sundered and alone, as Abraham did, met Moriah, or Kierkegaard did, face to face with his own deprivation? Kierkegaard's answer to this is traditional. The fear of the Lord, says the Bible, is the beginning of wisdom. And for modern man, before that fear, and as a threshold to it, are the fear and trembling in which we begin to be a self. If you've never felt that fear and trembling, Kierkegaard's saying, you've never really began to exist. You're probably still stuck in here somewhere. Maybe in here. But you gotta feel that. And guess what? It's exciting. It's not a miserable, despairing type of fear and trembling. The most exciting things we've ever done. They're always a little risky, aren't they? And that's okay. Life is about more than staying safe all the time. What did Kierkegaard mean by distinguishing between subjective and objective truth? That's the next thing I have down there on your discussion sheet, and then we'll be done with this discussion sheet. After we finish that, a few more things from the text I want to run through before that point. The most deeply repressed emotions are those we call negative. The, quote, positive emotions, such as love or joy, lend themselves to all kinds of sentimental caricatures in popular art, which are probably more damaging to the spirit than outright repression of such feelings would be. But what love does not know the ache of fear? What joy is not tinged with regret? Modern man is farther from the truth of his own emotions than primitive man. When we banish the shudder of fear, the rising of the hair of the flesh in dread, or the shiver of awe, we shall have lost the emotion of the holy altogether. My goodness, this is a spot-on critique of modern society. We're so terrified of negative emotion. You walk through any bookstore, you'll see a whole self-help aisle of power of positive thinking. Just think positive thoughts, and you'll just you'll manifest positivity towards you. It's all a load of bull. You can't wish away the dark side of our existence. You can't just pretend it's not there. You can't just have positive thoughts and suppose that... I'm not saying be negative and cynical. Don't. I think I've said that enough already in this course. But the point is to confront honestly the dark side of existence. To not wish it, to not just pretend it's not there. To not just banish it from our conversation. To not just banish it from our minds, but to confront it head on. And to stop lying to ourselves. You know, more and more we're not even having funerals these days. We just call them celebrations of life. To pretend the person didn't even die. We're just celebrating their life. You start to feel anxious or depressed about anything, just pop a pill. Just chemically get rid of those emotions. And I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not at all commenting on that. From a medical perspective, there are, I'm sure, plenty of cases where that's necessary due to an actual chemical imbalance. I'm not criticizing that. That's for you and your psychiatrist to figure out, and I have no part in that. But I think it's also just as safe to say that it's abused. I think we can all admit that. Depression, anxiety, these are normal parts of the human condition. Everybody feels these things. We can't just run to a pill every time we have a, quote, negative emotion. That's part of life. We need it. We need this fear and trembling. So let's start being brutally honest. That's what we've been talking about that from the beginning of this course. That's what existentialism is asking of us. Be brutally honest about even the darker parts of life. Confront them, and then maybe you'll find some success. Despair, he says, is the sickness unto death, the sickness in which we long to die, but cannot die. Thus it is the extreme emotion in which we seek to escape from ourselves, and it is precisely this latter aspect of despair that makes it such a powerful revelation of what it means to exist as a human individual. We are all in despair, consciously or unconsciously, according to Kierkegaard, and every means we have of coping with this despair, short of religion, is either unsuccessful or demonic. Kierkegaard advances two general principles that are in advance of nearly all current psychologies. Despair is never ultimately over the goodness. You guys probably can't even hear me with these motorcycles going so loudly outside. Anyway, let me pause right there. So he's saying we're all in despair. Some of us cover it up better than others, but we're all basically in despair. And sometimes we try to medicate it away. Sometimes we try to power positive think it away. Sometimes we try to flood it with pleasures and distractions, as Pascal would say, habit and distraction. Kierkegaard's saying there's only one remedy to that, and that's religion. That's something, the deepest possible remedy is the only remedy that can succeed for the deepest possible ailment of despair. So he's begging us to make this leap of faith. He's begging us to. He's saying we need it. All right. Here we are at Subjective and Objective Truth. Page 170. Religion is not a system of intellectual propositions to which the believer assents because he knows it to be true, as like a system of geometry is true. Existentially, for the individual himself, religion means in the end simply being religious. So if you look up any religion on Google, you're going to find a system of worship, creeds, teachings. That's not religion. I mean, that's not what it means to, that is not the truest meaning of religion. The truest meaning of religion, I'm not criticizing the dictionaries or I think they can't do this, but if you wanted to get a definition of, well, since we're in the Kierkegaardian, we'll say Christianity, you can't get that in words. If you wanted the definition of Christianity, you would need what? You need a Christian. That would be the definition of Christianity for that Christian. Now, all religions have a common core of beliefs and practices, of course. Christianity certainly. But what Christianity is actually different for each Christian. And I don't mean that in the relativist sense. I don't mean it's your truth and that person's truth. Of course not. That's bogus. That makes... Kierkegaard is not... when Kierkegaard is distinguishing between subjective and objective truth and emphasizing the importance of the subjective, which I'll get to in a moment, he is not being a modern subjectivist who says that things are only subjective. That is a completely different meaning of the term, which Kierkegaard would not agree with at all. He's not a relativist, he's not a subjectivist. What he's saying is that the subjective dimension of religion is the superior one. In other words, how you live it is superior to whether you technically have the doctrines in your head and go to the church on Sundays, stuff like that. That's the objective dimension. The subjective dimension is how much you have made it your own, how much you have made it the meaning of your life, and how much you live every single day authentically in accordance with that meaning. That's the subjective dimension of religion, of truth, that he is advocating for here, focusing more on than the merely objective. All right, let me do some erasing. If I know, and here I am, I'm reading a quote from page 171 of the book, if I know that twice 2 is 4, this knowledge is in the highest degree impersonal. Once I know it, I know it. And I need not struggle continuously to make it my own. An elementary school student, my 5-year-old son knows just as well as Albert Einstein knew that 2 plus 2 is 4. That is not a truth that requires struggle to make it your own. It's there, you can put it in your head pretty easily, and you're done. That's all there is to it. I need not struggle continuously to make it my own. It is a reliable piece of lumber in the mental attic, one on which I can put my hand any time I have need for it. It's there when you need it. It's not there to intrude. Now I'm commenting. This objective truth, this objective knowledge, it's there when you need it in your head. It doesn't necessarily intrude into your life to make any demands upon yourself. It's convenient. It's comfortable. In other words, it's not enough to live authentically with. Merely having it means very little. But the truth of religion is not at all like that. It is a truth that must penetrate my own personal existence, or it is nothing. And I must struggle to renew it in my life every day. What is in question here, says Kierkegaard, is one's own personal appropriation of the truth. Appropriation coming from the Latin root proprius, meaning one's own. When you appropriate, you've probably heard the word appropriate before. He's just talking about the etymology there. It means really making something your own, which doesn't mean relativizing it. It doesn't mean twisting it to satisfy your own personal desires, whatever they happen to be. It means bringing it into your own heart and not just your mind. It means subjecting yourself to it. A learned theologian, now I'm reading the quote again, a learned theologian, a scholarly theologian in other words, may be in possession of all the so-called truths of rational theology, able to prove and disprove propositions, and generally hold his own dialectically, or philosophically, conversationally, with the best, and yet in his heart God may have died or never lived. On the other hand, an illiterate peasant, who knows nothing of formal theology, who may not even be able to state accurately the tenets of his own creed, nevertheless may succeed in being religious, whereas the scholar failed to. He is, in truth, as we say, and people who know him can recognize this fact from his presence, his bearing, his way of life. Sorry, he is in the truth. That's what the quote says. He is in the truth, as we say. People can recognize this from his way of life. How valid of a point that is. And I can testify to it from personal experience. I studied for years, graduate study at a college and seminary. Learned, scholarly, doctoral theologians there. Some of whom were about as godless, among the most godless people I've ever met. That wasn't generally the case, but in some cases it was. And they knew all the theological facts, and they proposed themselves. They held themselves forth as religious, as Christian, and they were not at all, because there was no evidence of that in their way of life. They hadn't appropriated the truths that they were standing there arguing about, teaching about. So it means nothing. If it's just in your head, it's nothing as far as religious truth is concerned. It's got to be appropriated within yourself. And often, I dare say usually, the peasant does this better than the scholar. Because the scholar is always tempted to what? Remember what we just had on the board. The scholar is always tempted to revert back to the aesthetic. Because he's got all this knowledge in his head, and he can just kind of start looking at it as interesting and not necessarily something I need to struggle with and make my own and live in accordance with. And there's the peasant realizes he doesn't have all that knowledge to defer to and say, oh, here, I'm religious because I have all these religious facts in my head. The peasant realizes that he's either a godless pagan or he's devoutly, existentially, authentically religious. Those are his only two options. And in fact, Kierkegaard is saying those are the only two options for anyone. It doesn't matter how much religious stuff you know. It doesn't even matter if you obey the rules and go to church. He's not saying don't do those things, by the way. Don't think that Kierkegaard is saying stop going to church and stop obeying the ethical teachings of your religion. He's not saying that. He's just saying infinitely more than that is needed to actually be Christian. I have a little note here in the margin. I can't help but share this from some years ago. I was teaching comparative religion class, and a student of mine just walked out of class. I was like, oh, and I never take offense at anything, really, but it's always, you're always wondering why. And she later told me that there was a girl in the bathroom who was suicidal, and she had to go talk her off the ledge, basically. So that was a beautiful example of being religious at the expense of acquiring more facts about religion. Because that's all I can do in a comparative religion class. I can teach you facts about religion. I can't make you religious. You have to choose that on your own. And that student did choose that at that moment. Because she, you're not under any, she wasn't under any imperative to go in there and try to do a good deed. She could have just washed her hands of it, literally in the past. She could have just washed her hands and left. But she didn't. She chose to treat others as she would like to be treated. And that was noble. That's just one little example of being religious at the expense of perhaps knowing more about religion. It's always superior to be. Be is greater than know. All right, let me put that in a quicker few sentences for your notes. Objective truth here is compelling merely by observing it. Compelling meaning demanding assent. Always think of the Pythagorean theorem as the quintessential example here, just truths of geometry. Compelling merely by observation. It is easily made one's own without struggle. It is easily acquired without struggle, I should say. Now, you might be tempted to protest against that and say, no, it's not. It's really hard, because I just got out of calculus class, and my goodness, that stuff is hard. No, it's not. It's easy. If you think it's hard, it's because you don't have a good teacher. Sorry, no offense to the math teachers out there. I was one for a long time. It's just that, when you have a whole class of students there, you can't cater to each individual student's needs. So, but, I can confidently say that give me the most thick-skulled student out there, as long as they don't have a mental disability, I can get any mathematical concept into their head. I can force it in there. It's just, I know it. I know that I can. Nothing special about me. It's the subject matter. It's fundamentally communicable. It is easily made one's own. As long as you have the capacity for reason, you can grasp any mathematical truth. A computer can do math. The world's least intelligent person is much smarter than the world's best supercomputer. It's easily made one's own without struggle, without the type of struggle we're talking about here, at least. Yes, it might take time. That's the nature of objective truth. Now, to master it, as I mentioned, sometimes this takes time. And who has time to really master these things? Well, only the scholars. Anyone could be a scholar. But the scholars are the ones who have had time to dedicate to this. So, it is mastered only by scholars. Those scholars don't necessarily struggle at all to master it. They just happen to have had the time to. Which is why they're often aesthetic. They're often living the aesthetic life, and that's it. Okay, that's Kierkegaard's qualm with them. But what about subjective truth? Well, subjective truth is that dimension of the truth that you have appropriated within yourself. This is whether and to what degree one is existentially committed to the contents, meaning what's within it, the contents of objective truth. And often, in this case, the simple masters subjective truth better than the scholar. And there's a number of reasons for this. I've already mentioned a couple of them. But one of the reasons that should be brought up before we end here is that the simple can't rationalize their way out of it. A simple person opens up the gospel and says, he sees that it says don't commit adultery, so he doesn't commit adultery. The scholar can find some way to weasel his way out of that, and use situation ethics and say, oh, but I can just, times have changed. I can look at development of doctrine. I can do all sorts of magical tricks in my theologizing and make what's clearly not okay seem okay. The simple can't do that. For the simple, it's basically subjective truth or nothing. And if you're an authentic, simple person, you're going to realize that, and you're going to be existentially committed. And you're probably going to have an easier time, a better time, I should say, rising up to the highest level of existence. And this is where we see in existentialism a bit of rebellion even against Platonism, where Plato is saying, no, deliverance, the highest level of existence is intellectual abstract contemplation. So that's certainly not what existentialism would say. No, commitment is the key virtue here. And you can do that just as well, perhaps even better, as a simple person. So it's so ironic, isn't it, for me to stand here, you know, as a philosophy professor here, teaching a college course with this relentless reiteration of the greatness of simplicity and the uselessness of scholarly knowledge and philosophical scholarly knowledge at the expense of authentic commitment. And that I don't care. I'm not going to pretend it's otherwise. If you're called to be a scholar, be a scholar. Be a good one. I love philosophy. I'm working on my PhD myself and have nothing against that. But we've got to be honest with ourselves and realize that that's not where our value lies. It lies somewhere else. And the existentialists, even if they go to some uncalled for extremes in some cases, do a great job calling our attention to that fact. Kierkegaard does it in his own way. The other existentialists do it in their own way. But this is enough for now. I may have another lecture on Kierkegaard, or I might just move on to Nietzsche. I'm not sure. But I believe at this point I've given you everything you need for your discussion sheets, for the 3 Kierkegaard discussion sheets at least. So I will see you in our next lecture.